Greetings metalheads and welcome to No Nonsense Metal Reviews. I'm George and today I have another edition of my favourite compilations for you. So if you've seen the other episodes in this little mini series, then you'll be familiar with the concept. These are compilation albums that I think are just as important or just as enjoyable as, say, the band's full-length studio albums or some of their live albums. I think that these are compilations which are definitely worth checking out. So, if you've seen those other episodes, the first three, then you'll be aware that I like compilations, not the typical greatest hits or best of or fan favourite tracks of so and so. Not really interested in that. It just doesn't do it for me. I've never been the sort of person that would opt for the greatest hits first. The only times that I really go for a compilation album is when it's a compilation of either the additional non-studio album tracks, maybe singles, demo versions, EPs, tracks that have just been a B-side and they've been omitted from the full-length studio album. For whatever reason, I quite like those releases that tie up all those loose ends, because sometimes it's the tracks on those EPs which are actually just as good, if not better in some cases, than the studio material. So, I've got three more picks today, and I did actually kind of surprise myself that I forgot about a couple of these. Certainly when we're talking about this particular article, this is from US sort of tech death metal band, I guess, old school death metal in places, but certainly very brutal, very extreme. I'm talking about Nile, with their thematics of ancient Egypt and the ancient world. This is the In the Beginning compilation. So really I guess this is kind of cheating in a way, because this is only two EPs, or I think it's an EP and a demo being compiled together for this one. But I love that cover. There's a really interesting cover there. It's very Nile. Very good stuff indeed. So this compiles the Festivals of Atonement from 1995 and Ramses, the Bringer of War demo. So interestingly, this little compilation, I think this came out in the late 90s, it might have been early 2000, it says 1999/2000. So, but this is quite an interesting compilation of these two recordings, because I think I'm not going to be one of those people that sits there and says, I only like the first things that they did. After that, they changed, they suck, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to say that, because that's not true. I think Nile have remained consistently great throughout their catalogue, really. But In the Beginning, with these two recordings, they sound very different to how they do sound now. Far less technical, far more rooted in old school death metal, with a little bit of that kind of more extreme end thrash riffing at times, but far less intense. Whereas now, Nile are absolutely barbaric. When we have albums like That Which Should Not Be Unearthed, we've had At the Gates of Sethu, we've had these really quite technical, really quite extreme albums. Prior to that, from around, I would say, from around the period of In Their Darkest Shrines, they started to get far more technical, far more extreme. Annihilations of the Wicked, for example. But with that first album, amongst the Catacombs of Neferenka, and of course the Great Black Seeds of Vengeance, that was far more old school death metal. Very aggressive, very heavy, but far less technical and extreme. Here, this is really just old school death metal. It is complex, it is extreme, but it's not as extreme as what they have become. But we get some really great tracks, and I particularly enjoy the Festivals of Atonement EP, we'll call it. We've got some killer tracks there. The first track is called Divine Intent, so we get quite an interesting interlude piece, or intro piece I should say. interesting stuff, sets the atmospherics perfectly before we get a bludgeoning death metal assault. We've got Wrought and Extinct, which for me are the standouts. Long songs, really, they're quite sort of stretched out. Even have sort of doomier death doom flourishes at times, but really heavy. Some of the riffs there are killer. Vocals are nasty, of course they are. It's Nile. We expect no less. A simple lineup there, just the three guys at this stage, but absolutely destroying it here. Absolutely killing it. Ramses the Bringer of War is the demo and includes 2 tracks that, well, actually I think all 3 of these tracks do end up on the Amongst the Catacombs of Neferunkar album, the debut. But we've got the Howling of the Yin or Jinn, and we've got Ramses Bringer of War. Heavy as hell, really good stuff, a little bit more technical than the stuff that we get on the Festivals of Atonement, but this is great. This is primitive Nile, but they are such great musicians, such great songwriters, even at this stage. It's heavy, it's good stuff, really enjoyable. I think it's a great compilation, it flows nicely, and it's certainly a nice thing for want to just hear what these guys were doing in the beginning. So, my first compilation choice, Nile, In the Beginning, compiling that Festivals of Atonement EP and Ramses the Bringer of War demo. So, keeping things extreme then, gonna go with a great EP compilation. Another good one. I feel like I've talked about this with relation to choosing my favourite EPs not that long ago, but I'm talking about Napalm Death, Grindcore Legends, with Death by Manipulation. So this is a compilation that came out in 1991, I believe. 1991. So this compiles 4 separate releases. We have the Mass Appeal Madness EP, we have Suffer the Children, we also have Mentally Murdered, and we have the tracks from a split 7-inch single release with SOB. So what we've got here is quite a good bookend piece. It rounds off all those extra non-album releases, non-full-length releases I should say, from the band prior to that point. And I really like releases like that. I have to say, you know, like I've mentioned, some of the tracks that you get here are nearly as good or just as good or sometimes better than some of the actual full-length studio material. I think where this one does lose a little bit of momentum is the fact that the first half, where you've got the Mass Appeal Madness EP, which is a great EP, you've got some killer tracks there like the title track, Pride Assassin, Unchallenged Hate. This is heavy, crushing stuff. And then of course you've got Suffer the Children. So you've got that title track, which is one of, if not the best, Napalm Death songs in my opinion. That riff is so heavy, so groovy, and you can absolutely hear the fact that this is a Scott Burns Morrisound mix. You know, Harmony Corruption was, for all intents and purposes, an old school death metal album, absolutely. It's a great album, I love it. Probably do without the inclusion of the title track, Harmony Corruption there, because of course that's more like a interlude piece anyway. But you've got Suffer the Children and you've got Siege of Power. Heavy as hell, really enjoyable stuff. Killer material. But then when we've got the Mentally Murdered EP, we've come away from those first 2 releases where you've got Mark Greenway, Barney Greenway on vocals there, who joined after the departure of Lee Dorian, who was vocalist present for the first 2 albums, Scum and From Enslavement to Obliteration, and then also the Mentally Murdered EP. But now we're going back to the more primitive sound, more primitive style. I feel that it would have worked better having the earlier material first and then building up to the more modern stuff, but maybe that's just me. But we've got some great tracks on the Mentally Murdered EP. The title track is a really good one, Cause and Effect. Interesting rendition of Walls of Confinement there, another good moment. Then we close things off with the split EP tracks, or the split single release tracks with SOB, which really are just kind of primitive grind tracks. Some good material though. What I really appreciate about these particular releases from the early period is that you've still got the great Bill Steer on guitars there. His riffs, they are very much synonymous with the sound of Carcass for me. Obviously, he went on to join Carcass after his departure from Napalm Death, but his riffs, even at this stage, in their raw primitive form, it does sound like Carcass to me. But it's really good stuff, actually, and like I say, it's a really good way of tying off some of those extra album tracks and also some of those versions of tracks that are just really good from that period. Classic Napalm Death tracks. So, Death by Manipulation, another good compilation from Napalm Death, with grindcore legends there. Not everyone's cup of tea, of course, but I think that certainly those Mass Appeal Madness and the Suffer the Children EPs, they are well worth hearing. For any self-respecting old school death metal fan or just old school grind fan, stuff you gotta hear. So, changing style slightly here, but sticking with Lee Dorian, how could we forget Serpent's Gold? Now, I know that I have said I don't like just the best ofs and, you know, the classics, fan favourites, whatever, but this one I'll make a slight exception for two reasons, in fact. Because, firstly, we've got 2 discs. The second disc includes a lot of non-album tracks, a lot of loose ends, bits and pieces from, I guess, live things, demos, from the extras, the non-album things. And also, the first disc, although it is, of course, compilation of the best of Cathedral, their studio albums are a little bit more tricky to actually get hold of. I do have a few now. I've managed to find The Ethereal Mirror and Hopkins' Witchfinder General. I think I've managed to find Caravan Beyond Redemption as well. So I found a few things, but actually I want to hear what else is going on. You know, you can't get hold of the Static Magic EP. You can't get hold of numerous bits and pieces from their catalogue, but also what I really like about this particular compilation is the fact that you can just put it on and it is just great Sabbath-esque doom. Start to finish, you don't have to think too hard about it, you've just got some killer doomy stoner doom metal there and it sounds awesome. How could we resist Ride? Classic opening track, so much groove there. Hopkins' Witchfinder General, one of, if not the best Cathedral song in my opinion. So much savage groove there, love it. Autumn Twilight in all of its weird sinister mastery. Midnight Mountain, another creepy one, very stonery, very psychedelic in fact. Soul Sacrifice, very good song, very heavy. Enter the Worms, which is so crushingly doomy, brilliant stuff. But elsewhere, we've got some other killer material. Vampire Sun, Ebony Tears, the great doom, very heavy death doom passage in fact. Utopian Blaster, with that wonderful Tony Iommi contribution there. So yeah, although it's effectively a greatest hits, I think that it's well worth it because it's just an enjoyable listen. And also on track 2, disc 2 rather, you do have some great additional tracks there. A great demo version of Night of the Seagulls, Magic Mountain as well, another good one. I believe that's from the Static Magic EP. Then we've got The Old Oak Tree, another good one. An interesting demo version of Carnival Bazaar. Cover song, which I believe is a Witchfinder General song, of Rabies, another interesting moment. And yeah, it's just an enjoyable listen. But mainly that first disc, which is just full of classic Cathedral, heavy doom metal. Really enjoyable stuff. It's the kind of music that requires the headphones and the ale. Perfect combination. So there you have it. That's 3 more compilations that I feel are just as important and just as enjoyable as some of the full-length albums or the studio albums. Just to recap, we've got Nile with In the Beginning, definitely, in my opinion, just as good as the material that we've got on Among the Catacombs of Nephron Ka. which is a great album. It's that less technical but still extreme death metal. Brilliant stuff. Napalm Death with their Death by Manipulation compilation here. An interesting mix, tying up all those loose ends, and I'm a loose ends kind of guy. In fact, it's interesting because I had this conversation not that long ago with my dad, and I think it was with regards to some of the more recent reissues from, I think it was Uriah Heep, in fact, where you've now got 2-disc versions with loads of bonus content. And that is quite often the way now, that with so many anniversary releases, so many remixed, remastered, re-released, whatever, you've got all these different forms of albums coming out, and they are packed with often more bonus content than original content. And I remember my dad saying that actually he doesn't want to hear any of that. He just wants to hear the album, the original album, or a remixed version of, but just the core album, without all the extras. I can kind of understand that point of view, definitely, because how many different versions of those tracks do you need to hear? But when it includes the EPs, some split release material, things like that, that you're not going to hear on the full length albums, I think you're missing out, potentially missing out. But I appreciate that point of view. I can definitely understand both sides of the argument. But and also we have Cathedral with The Serpent's Gold, a great compilation. This was actually probably my introduction to Cathedral properly. I'd heard some tracks from the Witchfinder General, the Hopkins Witchfinder General album. I believe it was on the EP of that title track anyway. Got into them through that, but this was the most accessible thing that I could actually get hold of at the time. So this became my introduction. I've kind of worked backwards. But I think these are all great compilations. What do you think of these compilations? Are you familiar with them? If not, I do recommend you check them out. Certainly if you're like me and you like to know the material, you like to know a little bit more to the story than just the studio albums, like to go a little bit deeper, these are definitely worth checking out for that extra content. But check them out. Let me know what you think about them. I'm very interested to know, of course. Thanks again for watching, my friends. Do feel free to like and subscribe. And of course, check back soon for more reviews and recommendations of all that good, heavy stuff. But as always, my friends, you take care and stay heavy.